Together we'll explore biblical truths, a beacon of hope and transformative wisdom. So like and share to spread the light. Subscribe, walk this sacred path with us. Comment, share your spiritual insights. Show gratitude, connect through love. Check out products below, support our mission. Your purchase fuels our ministry's calling. Each video, a revelation. Each story, a blessing. King Solomon, a name that echoes through the ages as the wisest man who ever lived. Blessed by God with unparalleled wisdom, staggering wealth, and immense power, he stood at the pinnacle of human achievement. Yet beneath the golden surface of his glory lay a profound tragedy that speaks to the deepest corners of every human heart. What could cause such a blessed man, one who spoke with God, built the magnificent temple, and whose wisdom drew royalty from distant lands, to end his days in spiritual ruin? How did the king who had everything eventually declare that all was meaningless? Join us on an extraordinary journey through the life of Solomon as we uncover the untold story of his rise, his fall, and his final days. This isn't just a tale of ancient royalty, it's a mirror reflecting our own struggles with pride, temptation, and the eternal question, what truly matters in life? From the glorious heights of divine favor to the sobering depths of spiritual compromise, Solomon's story carries timeless lessons that still echo powerfully today. Stay with us as we explore how the man who asked for wisdom found himself lost in folly, and what his journey can teach us about our own path to lasting fulfillment. If you find value in these timeless biblical stories that illuminate our own spiritual journeys, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these profound messages of faith and wisdom with others who might benefit from them. And if you're moved by what you're about to witness, consider sharing this video with someone who might need its message today. Sometimes, the greatest wisdom comes not from our successes, but from understanding where others have fallen. Let us begin this compelling journey together as we explore the story of Solomon, the king who had it all, lost it all, and left us with profound wisdom born from both his triumphs and his failures. Before we dive deep into this remarkable story, remember to click the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming biblical narratives that bring ancient wisdom to light in our modern world. In the twilight of ancient Jerusalem, as the sun cast long shadows across the city walls, a profound transition was about to unfold. King David, the warrior poet who had led Israel through triumph and tribulation, lay in his final days. The palace corridors buzzed with whispers of succession, but in the quiet of his chamber, David knew God's choice had already been made. Solomon, his son by Bathsheba, stood before him, young, untested, yet marked by divine purpose. The weight of prophecy hung in the air as David's weathered hands rested upon his son's shoulders. "My son," he spoke with the gravity of years, "know the God of your father, and serve him with a whole heart and a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts, and understands every intent of the thoughts." These words would echo through Solomon's life, a foundation laid in those precious final moments with his father. But the path to the throne would not be smooth. Adonijah, Solomon's older brother, had already moved to seize power, hosting a grand feast and declaring himself king. In this moment of crisis, we see the first glimpse of the wisdom that would later define Solomon's reign. Instead of rushing to conflict, Solomon waited. Through the swift actions of Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, David was roused to action. "As the Lord lives," David declared, "surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place." The response was immediate and decisive. Solomon was anointed at Gihon, and the sound of rejoicing shook the very earth. Picture that moment, the blast of trumpets, the shouts of "Long live King Solomon" echoing off the ancient stones of Jerusalem. But amidst the celebration, Solomon's heart was turned toward a deeper purpose. The Bible tells us that in those early days, Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the statutes of his father David. It was at Gibeon that Solomon's destiny would be forever altered. The great high place where he went to offer sacrifices became the stage for one of the most remarkable encounters between God and man. 1,000 burnt offerings Solomon presented, not as a display of wealth, but as an act of profound devotion and humility before the Lord. That night, as the embers of sacrifice still glowed under the stars, God appeared to Solomon in a dream. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you," came the divine invitation. Imagine standing before the Creator of the universe, offered anything your heart could desire: power, wealth, long life, the defeat of enemies. But Solomon's response revealed a heart that understood the true nature of leadership and the awesome responsibility that had been placed upon him. His words, recorded in 1 Kings, speak to us even today about the essence of true wisdom. "O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" This moment of humility, this recognition of human limitation before divine purpose, so pleased the Lord that he gave Solomon not only the wisdom he requested, but also the things he hadn't asked for: riches, honor, and the promise of long life if he would walk in God's ways. The wisdom God granted Solomon would soon be tested in ways that would capture the imagination of generations to come. Perhaps no story better illustrates this than the famous judgment between two mothers claiming the same child. As they stood before him in the great hall of judgment, Solomon faced what seemed an impossible challenge. No witnesses, no evidence, just the conflicting claims of two women over one living baby. What followed was a display of wisdom that revealed the true nature of love and motherhood. "Bring me a sword," Solomon commanded, his voice filling the hushed chamber. "Cut the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other." The true mother's heart was revealed in her immediate cry: "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." In this moment of divine insight, Solomon saw beyond the surface of the dispute to the very heart of truth. "Give the living baby to the first woman," he declared. "Do not kill him. She is his mother." News of this judgment spread throughout Israel, inspiring awe and reverence for their young king. People saw in him not just human wisdom, but the very wisdom of God at work. But Solomon's greatest early achievement was yet to come: the building of the temple, a dream his father David had carried in his heart but had not been permitted to fulfill. For 7 years, Jerusalem echoed with the sounds of construction as the magnificent structure took shape. The finest materials were gathered from across the known world: cedar from Lebanon, precious stones, and gold in such abundance that silver became common as stones in Jerusalem. When the temple was finally completed, it stood as a testament to both human craftsmanship and divine inspiration. The dedication ceremony marked the pinnacle of Solomon's early reign, a moment when wisdom, wealth, and worship came together in perfect harmony. As the Ark of the Covenant was brought into its place, Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord and spread out his hands toward heaven. His prayer of dedication reveals the depth of wisdom God had granted him. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? These words showed that Solomon understood a profound truth, that the magnificent temple, for all its glory, was but a humble dwelling place for the presence of the infinite God. As he finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The people fell prostrate, worshiping and praising God, saying, "He is good, His love endures forever." It was a moment of perfect alignment between heaven and earth, between divine purpose and human response. This was Solomon at his finest, wise, humble before God, leading his people in worship. These early years of his reign would stand as a testament to what is possible when human potential meets divine purpose, when wisdom is sought above all else, and when a heart remains true to its first love for God. The golden years of Solomon's reign painted a picture of prosperity that would capture imaginations for millennia to come. As the morning sun rose over Jerusalem, its rays caught the glint of gold that seemed to cover every surface of the royal city. This was not mere opulence. It was a physical manifestation of God's blessing, a testimony to what happens when divine favor meets human faithfulness. Scripture tells us that Solomon made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Let us pause to consider the magnitude of this statement. In a land where every drop of water was precious, where shepherds fought over wells, Solomon's Jerusalem flowed with abundance that defied natural explanation. The king's yearly provision was staggering. 185,000 bushels of flour, 375,000 bushels of meal, 30 oxen from the fattened cattle, 100 sheep and goats, not counting the deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. Yet this abundance served a greater purpose than mere luxury. It fed thousands, including all who came seeking wisdom from the king. Solomon's palace complex was a marvel that took 13 years to complete. The house of the forest of Lebanon, with its towering cedar pillars, spoke of majesty and might. Imagine walking through its grand halls, where light filtered through high windows, casting patterns on floors of pure gold. 3 rows of 15 pillars each created a forest-like canopy above, while precious stones adorned the walls in intricate patterns that caught every ray of light. But it was Solomon's throne that captured the imagination of all who beheld it. Made of ivory and overlaid with pure gold, it stood as the finest throne ever made for any kingdom. 6 steps led up to the seat, with 12 lions standing guard, one on each side of every step. The symbolism was profound. The lions represented not just power, but the authority to judge with divine wisdom. As visitors approached the throne, each step reminded them they were walking toward justice, guided by God's wisdom. The daily operations of Solomon's court reflected an order and abundance that left visitors speechless. His cupbearers moved with practiced grace, serving from golden vessels, so numerous they were never counted. Even the most mundane household items were crafted from pure gold. Silver was considered too common for Solomon's table. This wasn't mere extravagance, it was a physical manifestation of God's promise fulfilled. I will give you riches and wealth and honor, such as none of the kings who were before you has possessed, nor those who will come after you. Trade flourished under Solomon's wise administration. His fleet of ships, manned by experienced Phoenician sailors, returned every 3 years bearing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Merchant caravans brought spices from Arabia, while Egyptian chariots and horses passed through Solomon's territories, generating wealth through tariffs and trade. The king's business acumen transformed Jerusalem into the center of international commerce. Yet it was wisdom, not wealth, that truly defined Solomon's golden age. The Queen of Sheba's visit stands as testament to this truth. Having heard reports of Solomon's wisdom, she came with hard questions and a heart full of skepticism. The scene of her arrival was magnificent. A great caravan bearing spices, gold, and precious stones, yet she came seeking something far more valuable. We can picture her, this powerful queen, sitting with Solomon, testing him with riddles and hard questions. As the hours turned to days, her skepticism melted into awe. The Bible records her powerful testimony. The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. What moved her most wasn't the splendor of his palace or the efficiency of his administration, though these impressed her greatly. It was, as she observed, the happiness of your people, the satisfaction of your officials, and the way your cupbearers are dressed and serve at your table. Here was wisdom that didn't just accumulate knowledge but transformed lives. Solomon's wisdom found expression in many forms. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, crafting words that would guide generations in paths of righteousness. His songs numbered 1,005, expressing the full range of human experience before God. He discoursed on nature, from the mighty cedars of Lebanon to the humble hyssop growing in the walls, understanding the divine lessons written in creation itself. People came from all nations to hear Solomon's wisdom, sent by kings who had heard of his insights. Each visitor brought gifts, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons, spices, horses, and mules. Yet Solomon's greatest gift to these seekers wasn't found in his answers to their questions, but in pointing them toward the source of true wisdom. As he would later write, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." In these golden years, Solomon's court became a center of learning and cultural exchange. Scholars and sages gathered to share knowledge, while artists and craftsmen created works of unprecedented beauty. The king's gardens became famous throughout the known world, featuring plants from distant lands, a living testament to the breadth of his knowledge and the reach of his influence. Each day in Jerusalem began with the sound of singers and musicians praising God. The Levites, arranged in their divisions, led worship according to David's pattern, while priests performed their sacred duties in the temple. Solomon maintained this divine order with careful attention, understanding that true prosperity flows from proper worship. Peace reigned during these years, fulfilling God's promise to David of a son who would be a man of peace. From the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms. Each ruler in these territories brought tribute, acknowledging Solomon's divinely appointed authority. This peace wasn't just the absence of war, it was the positive presence of justice, wisdom, and divine order. The biblical account tells us that all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. This wasn't just diplomatic language, it was a recognition that Solomon's wisdom transcended human understanding. Through him, God was showing the world what was possible when a human heart aligned fully with divine purpose. In these golden years, every aspect of life in Israel reflected the harmony between heaven and earth. From the daily administration of justice to the grand ceremonies in the temple, from the prosperous trade routes to the songs of wisdom that filled the air, God's blessing was evident. Solomon's court stood as a testament to what human civilization could become under divine guidance. Yet even in the midst of such unprecedented blessing, subtle changes began to take root in Solomon's heart. Like a morning mist that slowly dims the brightest sun, these changes were almost imperceptible at first. The very blessings God had bestowed, wisdom, wealth, and influence, began to transform from gifts into temptations. Solomon's pursuit of international alliances led him down a path that would gradually reshape his spiritual landscape. The Bible tells us, with a note of profound sadness, that King Solomon loved many foreign women. These weren't just matters of the heart, they were political marriages, each one seeming wise by worldly standards. The daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite women, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites all became part of his household. Consider the reasoning that might have justified these choices. Each alliance brought peace, each marriage secured a border, each relationship expanded trade. To the wise king, these must have seemed like prudent decisions. Yet God had specifically warned about such marriages, saying, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." The numbers are staggering. 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Each brought her own customs, her own beliefs, and her own gods into Jerusalem. At first, perhaps, it seemed harmless, a diplomatic courtesy to build shrines where these women could worship. But spiritual compromise rarely announces itself with trumpets. It creeps in through small concessions that seem reasonable at the time. As these foreign influences grew, Solomon's heart began to shift. The Bible describes this change with heartbreaking clarity. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. This wasn't a sudden rebellion but a gradual drift, like a ship slowly losing its anchor in calm waters. The consequences manifested in visible ways. High places began to appear on the hills around Jerusalem, altars to foreign gods that stood in stark contrast to the temple he had built with such devotion. For Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, he built shrines. For Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, he constructed high places. Even for Molech, whose worship involved child sacrifice, Solomon built places of worship. Picture the scene. The same hands that had built the temple of the Lord now built altars to false gods. The same wisdom that had discerned divine truth now rationalized spiritual compromise. The same heart that had once pleased God with its request for wisdom now turned to empty idols. The contrast was stark and devastating. This spiritual drift had profound implications. The Lord appeared to Solomon twice before. First in Gibeon when he granted him wisdom, and again after the temple dedication. Each time God had given clear warnings about the consequences of turning away. Now those warnings would become reality. The Lord's anger burned against Solomon, not because of a single act of rebellion, but because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. The personal nature of this breach makes it all the more tragic. This wasn't just breaking a rule, it was betraying a relationship. As Solomon's spiritual compromise deepened, problems began to surface in his kingdom. The peace that had marked his reign began to fray at the edges. The Lord raised up adversaries against Solomon. Hadad the Edomite and Rezon son of Eliada became thorns in his side. These weren't just political troubles. They were divine discipline, meant to turn Solomon's heart back to God. Most significantly, Jeroboam son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own officials, began to rise in prominence. Through the prophet Ahijah, God revealed that the kingdom would be torn apart after Solomon's death, with 10 tribes given to Jeroboam. The magnificent unity of Israel would not survive Solomon's spiritual wandering. Yet even in this judgment, we see God's mercy. For David's sake, this division would not happen during Solomon's lifetime. Moreover, 1 tribe would remain for Solomon's son, ensuring that David's line would continue and God's greater purposes would be fulfilled. Even in discipline, God remained faithful to his covenant promises. The tragedy of Solomon's decline lies not just in the external consequences, but in the internal transformation it revealed. The man who had once declared, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," now found himself entangled in the very practices he had once understood to be foolish. The wisdom that had brought him glory became clouded by compromise. His daily life reflected this spiritual confusion. The temple services continued, the sacrifices were made, but Solomon's heart was divided. He attempted to worship both the Lord and other gods, failing to understand that divided loyalty is no loyalty at all. The God who had appeared to him, blessed him, and given him unparalleled wisdom would not share his glory with idols. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of Solomon's decline was its gradual nature. There was no dramatic moment of rebellion, no clear point of no return. Instead, it was a slow drift from wisdom to folly, from devotion to compromise, from spiritual clarity to confusion. His story serves as a warning about the subtle nature of spiritual decline, how small compromises can lead to profound consequences. The foreign gods Solomon tolerated offered something that seemed attractive. Ashtoreth promised fertility and love, Chemosh promised power, Moloch promised security. Each idol appealed to a different aspect of human desire, yet none could fulfill what they promised. In turning to them, Solomon demonstrated how even the wisest can be deceived when they turn from the true source of wisdom. In Jerusalem, the evidence of this spiritual contradiction could be seen in the landscape itself. The temple, standing in its glory, now competed with high places on the surrounding hills. The incense of idolatrous worship mingled with the sacrifices offered to the Lord. This physical reality reflected the spiritual confusion that had taken root in the heart of Israel's wisest king. In the twilight of his reign, we find Solomon in a place few would have imagined during his glorious beginnings. Seated alone in his opulent palace, penning words that would become the book of Ecclesiastes. Meaningless, meaningless, he wrote, his heart heavy with the weight of experience. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. These weren't merely the bitter reflections of a disappointed man. They were hard-won insights from one who had explored every avenue of human experience, who had tasted every pleasure this world could offer, and found them all wanting. The wisest man who ever lived had come full circle, back to the essential truth he had somehow lost along the way. Picture him there, surrounded by the splendor he had accumulated, the gold, the precious stones, the exotic treasures from distant lands. All of it now seemed to mock him with its emptiness. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun, he wrote. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon's reflections in these final days cut through the illusions that so often captivate human hearts. He had built magnificent buildings, planted lush vineyards, created beautiful gardens and parks. He had amassed wealth beyond measure, collected rare treasures, surrounded himself with entertainment and pleasure. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired, he confessed. I refused my heart no pleasure. Yet sitting there looking back over his life, Solomon saw these pursuits for what they were, attempts to find meaning apart from God. His words in Ecclesiastes read like a testimony of paths explored and found wanting. Wisdom without God leads to frustration, pleasure leads to emptiness, work leads to weariness, wealth leads to worry. The tragedy wasn't that Solomon had experienced these things. It was that he had allowed them to draw his heart away from the source of true fulfillment. The temple still stood in Jerusalem, a testament to his early devotion, but now it shared the skyline with the high places he had built for foreign gods. This visible contradiction mirrored the spiritual confusion that had taken root in his heart. In these final reflections, we see glimpses of the wisdom God had originally given him, now refined through the fire of experience. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, he urged, understanding too well the cost of forgetting. These weren't just the words of a teacher. They were the passionate plea of one who had walked the path of forgetting and lived to regret it. Consider the poignancy of his position. The man who had built the temple, who had prayed that magnificent prayer of dedication, who had seen the glory of God fill the sanctuary, now wrote about the emptiness of life without genuine connection to God. The very wisdom that had made him famous now served to illuminate the depth of his folly. Yet even in these somber reflections, we see God's grace at work. Solomon's failures became a source of wisdom for future generations. His honest wrestling with life's ultimate questions, purpose, meaning, fulfillment, continues to resonate with seekers today. Through his fall and restoration, God provided the church with a profound testimony about the nature of true wisdom. In his final days, Solomon returned to the essential truth he had known at the beginning. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. This wasn't a new discovery, but a return to the foundation he had temporarily abandoned. The journey through emptiness had led him back to fullness, through foolishness, back to wisdom. Looking out over Jerusalem from his palace windows, Solomon could see the results of his divided heart. The kingdom that had reached its zenith under his rule would soon be torn apart. The peace he had maintained through political marriages and compromises would prove temporary. Yet even in this, there was a lesson for future generations about the futility of seeking security through human means rather than divine faithfulness. His relationships with his many wives, once justified as political necessity, now stood revealed as spiritual compromise. The foreign alliances that had seemed so wise by worldly standards had become the very means of his heart's wandering from God. In his final writings, we sense his understanding that true wisdom begins and ends with faithfulness to God alone. The Solomon who emerges from these last reflections is not the confident young king who had asked for wisdom, nor the powerful monarch who had dazzled the Queen of Sheba. This was a Solomon stripped of pretense, humbled by experience, finally understanding that all his wisdom, wealth, and accomplishments were meaningful only in relation to God. In his closing days, as he prepared to face eternity, Solomon left behind writings that would serve as both warning and wisdom for generations to come. The book of Proverbs showcases the practical wisdom God had given him. The Song of Songs celebrates the beauty of pure love. But it is perhaps in Ecclesiastes that we see most clearly the heart of a man who had experienced everything life could offer and found that only God truly satisfies. His final message wasn't one of despair, but of clarity. Life finds its meaning not in what we achieve or acquire, but in our relationship with God. The pursuit of pleasure, wisdom, wealth, or power apart from God leads only to emptiness. True fulfillment comes not from what we can grasp, but from what we receive from God's hand with gratitude. The sun was setting on Solomon's reign, but the lessons of his life were just beginning to shine. His story would serve as both warning and encouragement. Warning about the subtle danger of spiritual drift, encouragement that even the wisest need to remain dependent on God. Through his successes and failures, God provided the church with a profound testimony about the nature of true wisdom and the importance of maintaining a heart fully devoted to him. As we draw our journey through Solomon's life to a close, we're left with profound truths that echo across the centuries. The story of this remarkable king, his rise, his glory, his fall, and his return to wisdom speaks directly to our own spiritual journeys today. Like Solomon, we too face choices between true wisdom and worldly compromise. His life stands as both a beacon and a warning, showing us the heights of what's possible when we walk with God and the subtle dangers of drifting from our first love. The temples Solomon built still speak to us. The magnificent house of God represents our highest aspirations and devotion, while the high places he later constructed remind us how easily our hearts can be divided. His story asks us, what temples are we building in our own lives? What captures our devotion? Solomon's final wisdom, earned through both triumph and tragedy, resonates with unique power. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. These weren't mere words for him, but costly lessons written with the ink of experience. They call us to examine our own hearts and priorities. If you found value in this exploration of Solomon's life, we invite you to join us in building a community dedicated to understanding these timeless biblical truths. Like, share, and subscribe to receive more stories that illuminate God's wisdom for our lives. Click the notification bell to ensure you never miss our upcoming biblical narratives. For those who wish to go deeper, consider becoming a member of our community. You'll gain access to exclusive content that explores these spiritual truths in greater depth. Your support helps us continue bringing these profound biblical messages to others seeking wisdom. Below this video, you'll find carefully selected resources that complement today's message. Your engagement through these offerings helps sustain our mission of sharing God's wisdom with a world in need. Remember, Solomon's story isn't just history. It's a mirror reflecting our own spiritual journey. May we learn from both his wisdom and his failures, keeping our hearts fully devoted to the one who is the source of all true wisdom.